Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today I'd like to present to you another interview conversation that it was my pleasure of having. This time it is with our dear friend, Mr. Brian Saur. And I've spoken about Brian Saur and his wonderful podcast work on this channel before with respect to his podcasts called Pure Cinema and Just the Discs. And I've been a big fan and admirer of his work for many years. And I've had the great honor of being able to talk to him on and off camera, so to speak. And so today I was given the great opportunity to speak with him, and I enjoyed myself very much. Here is the interview, and I hope you enjoy it. Please find all the information about Brian Saur and the podcasts that he does and everything else that he mentioned during this conversation. Any information that you're looking for should be in the description box below. And so I hope you enjoy the interview, and I hope you find the additional information to be useful, helpful, and informative, because it is. It's really wonderful. And so please enjoy the podcasts that he does and is involved in and has mentioned, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Once again, with our dear friend, Mr. Brian Saur. So greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I am very happy today because I am going to be doing another conversation interview with a very special guest. I am so honored. I'm very excited right now because joining us today from California, correct?
That is correct.
Yes, is the one, the only Mr. Brian Saur. And as an introduction to Mr. Saur, Mr. Brian Saur, our dear friend, he is a film expert, lover, collector, connoisseur par excellence. You have very likely heard his podcast, Just the Discs, which I've talked about a lot on this channel, and with great pleasure and anticipation, because it is truly one of the best. And that's not all. And I plan to talk to him about that and many other of his podcast episodes and projects and film-related projects and the like, as well as his take on cinema. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Brian Saur. So Brian, welcome.
Thank you so much, sir. And also, I just want to say up top, thank you so much for all the plugging you've done for Just the Discs on your channel. It's incredibly and graciously appreciated.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. And also, right, Just the Discs and Pure Cinema.
Yes.
Yes.
I have two shows, and one is more Blu-ray related, which might be a little more of interest to your listeners, your viewers. But yeah, Pure Cinema is definitely a big one, a passion project for me. We do it in conjunction with the New Beverly Cinema here in Los Angeles, and it's a cult movie show, I guess, if you want to be broad about it. That's what we talk about.
A cult movie show. Excellent. Well, I think that I have listened to that podcast, and I subscribe to it on my phone, and so I listen to it fairly regularly. So I'm a big fan.
Thank
A big
you.
fan of yours. So, and I have been for a very long time. And so hopefully that will, we can talk about that going forward, my friend. But now that I have you here, I just, if you could let us know a little bit about, let's start with your podcasts, actually. So, as I mentioned, you do a lot of podcasts, and you have been doing this for a long time. Could you just let us know briefly about, what kinds of podcasting work you do, what kinds of film-related work that you do, and the types of topics that you talk about?
Sure. I'll try and be as brief as possible. I know you. I'm honored. I'm a big fan of yours as well, and I've told you this off mic. But the fact that you know and have listened to my shows prior to Just the Dis when I started, I mean, I have a history with a show called The Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema. That was my first podcast crush, the first show that I listened to and enjoyed. And I got so involved with that show that I started to do audio interviews for them. And that was sort of my first foray into podcasting. I mean, it's probably not 10 years ago. It's a while ago, though. But the real entry point for me, I think, was with my good friend Ryan Gallagher, who, of course, runs Criterion Cast and who I had been listening to for a while. He was gracious enough to invite me to be part of a show that he had already been doing called Off the Shelf. And then we sort of took it and made it more of a, it was more of a every so often kind of show, or maybe a monthly show. And we made it basically a weekly show where we were just going through Blu-ray releases, Blu-ray news. And that was just wonderful. That was about 2 years I did that show. That must be 4 or 5 years ago now. And it was a delight. It was really wonderful. And Ryan and I are very like-minded in terms of our collecting habits, our fandom for Criterion and such. And so I'm honored that you listened to that show way back. But that's so at a point, Ryan decided to step back from podcasting, and I couldn't let go of the bug. And I decided to, almost at the same time as I was starting Pure Cinema with my friend and co-host Elric Kane, I started Just the Dis as a way to have another outlet for Blu-ray talk. Also, I started a film blog called Rupert Pupkin Speaks in about 2009, 2010. I'd been doing lists there for a while, and then I got up to the point where I was doing Blu-ray reviews. I was getting the occasional review copy, and I got to be completely honest in that I started to burn out on writing about film, and I liked the idea of just talking about film as it seemed much easier, which it is in some ways. And so, yeah, I started Just the Dis as just a way to be like, here's me talking about Blu-rays, and I'll just talk about a pile of them, no editing at all, and we'll see where this goes. And then that sort of evolved as my involvement with Pure Cinema got more and more technical, and I started doing the editing for that show. I sort of basically taught myself how to edit, for better or worse, audio. And so then I started to bring in clips into Just the Dis, and we had already been doing that on Pure Cinema, and I started doing that more on Pure Cinema. And so that's become a kind of a blessing and a curse, because it's a lot of work, but it's definitely a lot of fun. So I don't know, but those two shows have become sort of my bread and butter, the two that I can't seem to let go of. So I do Just the Dis on a weekly basis, and I do, I think, for 3 years now, 3+ years. And same thing for Pure Cinema. That's been kind of a bi-weekly show of more recent note, because that's a little bit more research heavy. We go a little heavier into our topics when we do them. So it's a little bit more involved. So that's only a bi-monthly show. But yeah, those are the two shows that I focus on these days.
And I mean, I've listened to the shows on a number of occasions. And actually, let me take a step back. So you mentioned, yes, Off the Shelf with the great Ryan Gallagher. And yes, I was a great fan of Criterion Cast. And many, many years ago, I would listen to that show on a regular basis. And I'd listen to it, for instance, on my headphones to and from work. So on the train ride to my office. And it would be such a great thing for me, not only because I enjoy cinema, but also because living in Japan, I don't necessarily, and I used to live in the US, but of course I don't anymore. And so it was such a great way also for me to hear about the latest Blu-ray and home media releases. And this is being released, and this is cool, and this is a really great new Blu-ray, and this is a sort of thing that I wouldn't necessarily get first-hand experience in, because the release schedule here in Tokyo wouldn't obviously match up with the release schedule in North America, for example. And so I would always have such a great, what's the phrase, living vicariously through
Nice.
the right. But it was so wonderful for me to listen to that, and it helped me also to keep up with the news, so to speak, because that's also very. And I didn't do the YouTube channel back then, but just for my own edification, it was really very helpful and very educational, and also just you and Ryan have such a great rapport with each other, and it was a nice team. It was you have these great combos in film discussions, in podcasts and film criticisms, and I think you and Ryan really had such a great chemistry together. So it was a real pleasure for me to listen to that when it came up on my notification feed.
Yeah, he's a heck of a. I mean, he's an old pro, so he just really
Yeah.
made it easy and easygoing, and he sort of set the tone early on. It's just a very laid back vibe, and we're excited about these movies, and he got me more excited about them. I mean, he's just a really great guy, so he made it really easy to have fun and just talk movies on that show.
Yeah, and one of the things also that I really loved was how the two of you brought in you viewing experiences with your family,
Ah,
and that was a very important thing, and watching films with uh, with children, and watching them, and seeing how certain titles might play in terms of family viewing, etc. And the two of you brought in your own personal experiences into the discussion, and I really appreciate that, and that's something obviously that you continue on in terms of your own podcasting work going forward now. So it feels like it's a very it's a news related show. What you did then, and obviously what you do now. It's a film discussion criticism show as well, in terms of pure cinema, which is great. But also, I love the the personality that is into these episodes, and it makes for such pleasant listening, and it feels like we are talking, or it's like a conversation, just you and I, or you and your guest, talking in just a regular setting, over a couple of drinks or something like that. And I really enjoy that very much,
I
very
think
very much.
yeah, no, that I think that's one advantage to the format itself is it's a very intimate format, and I think people bond. I mean, I know I do with the shows that they love, and the people that they listen to become friends. They're in your ears all the time. It's a very close personal thing, and I've always I mean, I've not always understood it. I'm more recently in the last few years coming to understand just how much of an impact, uh, that kind of thing can have when we hear from listeners, even like yourself, saying the nice things you've said about just the disc, and in terms of the family stuff, it's always been great. And Ryan and I just happen to have daughters around the same age, and so it just felt natural. I mean, I can't help but involve my daughter and my son too. My son is much older. He's 21 now, but I mean, we watch movies all the time. He and I and my wife, and yeah, my daughter. I just decided at one point if she would be game, maybe it'd be fun to bring her into the show. And it's become a little more difficult, as I know dealing with a young person is sometimes not as easy as you would think in terms of scheduling and what have you. But yeah, I mean, I actually have an episode in the can right now. Uh, it's covering a topic you've already covered, which is the Bruce Lee Criterion box set with Raven, but it's not going to be nearly on the level of the in-depth nature of your series, which by the way was fantastic. And I know I told you this off mic, but just on air, I just that series was so in depth and so, I mean, well researched. And just talking to you also off mic about that stuff, I'm like, wow, he just really knows even more about this stuff than I do. So
No, no, you're way too kind, and I'm actually looking forward very much to hearing your take and Raven's take on this. No, very much so. I mean, this will be. I mean, you've seen the Bruce Lee films before, correct?
yeah, I think yeah, I've seen everything in the set, but we only watched three. I could only get her to agree to three films, so we only did about three quarters of the set
Okay,
ultimately.
okay. and maybe well, actually, I was going to ask how she felt about those films that she watched. But how about this? I will save that for the episode because I want to be surprised. You know,
Yeah.
whatever, however she feels, I think that's very important. You know, it's one of these things too about how these films how they will last over time, right? And part of that is how people who are younger than us in the generations that follow, right, how they will react and respond to these films, I think is a very interesting and uh, very important thing to listen to. And so I look forward to this very, very much. And I
Well,
think you and she will teach me so much about this. Really, I'm looking forward to this.
I don't know about teaching, but hopefully it'll be entertaining at least. But yeah, you're totally right about, and in terms of, I mean, I have a certain viewpoint on cinema, and I know you do have a certain openness to all forms of cinema, all time periods of cinema. But I guess I always try to keep in mind that in order for the culture of cinema itself to continue, we have to find ways to connect with a younger audience and make them understand or help them understand which are the films that still have a lasting impact. And there are many. And so it's always been entertaining to me to watch and see what things both my son and daughter respond to in, 2018, 2019, 2020, as to what I think films will have legs, if you will, cinematically, and will keep the conversation going about cinema, not just new cinema, but older stuff. And so that stuff is always really important to me and intriguing to me.
Yeah, I think that's well said, my friend. And I agree with you 1000% about that. And well, actually, while we're on the topic, let me shift to a slightly related one. You know, you spoke about how your children are now watching films, or how you watch films with them as as they are growing up. And so, I think the next natural question from me to you would be, for you in particular, Brian. I'm assuming, of course, that you have been watching films from a very early age, and I'd be very curious. And I know a number of people. Maybe I know you've spoken about this in the past, but maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing with us some of those film-related memories or film. Let me put it another way. I mean, what when you were growing up, what were some of those uh, influential films? Uh, Maybe there were films themselves, or maybe experiences in watching something in a particular situation. Whatever the case may be for you, what are some of those important milestone moments that you remember growing up that you could say made you or helped you along to become the film enthusiast that you are today?
Um, hmm. Well, okay. So I'll try and again be brief, but I'll touch on a couple things. One of which I know you can relate to specifically, but the first is drive-in theaters. I grew up in the 1980s, and my parents, they took us to theaters, but I seem to remember more often going to the drive-in theaters. We had one local drive-in that we would go to in the summers, and I remember specifically seeing Back to the Future and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and things in that period, um, at those theaters, and having a blast and really connecting with those movies. But I think the other thing for me was the video store environment. We had, and I've talked about this a lot, but we had a grocery store that we used to go to that was the first place that we really regularly went to because they had a video section, and we had gotten a VHS, VCR, and we started renting tapes. And my parents were, as it sounds like your parents occasionally could be, open about what I got. But I didn't go too crazy. I think mostly tying back to Bruce Lee, actually, I did a lot of action movie stuff. I had phases because I think one of the great things about the video store experience is that you had groups of movies. Like you could just find a bunch of Bruce Lee movies. I think I started with I think I started with Clint Eastwood because my dad was a fan of Clint Eastwood, and so I started watching, Dirty Harry, and then the Leone westerns and things like that, and then I moved on to Charles Bronson, and I did the Death Wish movies, and Death Wish 3 was especially resonant for me. um, and then, I did, I'm trying to think, Chuck Norris, I did Steven Seagal. I went sort of through those action 80s and 90s icons. And that was a big thing for me. I just remember doing those series of films and getting used to the idea of seeing the same person over and over and getting excited about what they might be doing in the next movie that I watched, created this anticipation or something. I don't know. So that was really big. But I think excuse me, I think the real turning point that I remember, one of the big ones, was that I had a really good friend, my best friend in high school, had an older brother, and he was, I want to say they were like 3 or 4 years older than us. So when we were freshmen in high school, they were seniors. Maybe they're 2 years. I can't remember. It was 2 or 3 years. And I remember specifically, they were really into lots of what seemed like weird, cool movies to me. I know they're really into David Lynch. I remember specifically my best friend's brother's good friend. This was back when you could do senior quotes for your picture. Like, you'd have the picture and they'd have a little quote. One of his friends had the quote, "She's dead, wrapped in plastic," and I didn't know what that meant at the time. But of course, that's a reference to Twin Peaks, and they were just really into David Lynch and Twin Peaks, and his brother had this really great collection, and I know you'll appreciate this, of VHS tapes. Okay, and I've talked about this before, but they were those, when you could record in the long speed, the EP speed, and you could get 3 movies on a tape. So he had them in one of those VHS pull-out drawers, and he had a dot matrix printout of all the movies in alphabetical order that he had taped off HBO, or I don't know if they were dubbing off other VHS. They might have been doing that. And so you could go through his dot matrix and it would say, go to tape 3B, and you'd go in the drawer and you pull it out. So I remember 2 of the movies that we watched off one of those tapes were A Clockwork Orange and Evil Dead 2. And both of those movies kind of like tore the top of my head off. They just really, Clockwork Orange, I just wasn't even remotely ready for at that point. I did not know what to make of that movie. It just seemed like, I don't know what, but it definitely seemed like something else than the action movies that I had been watching. So I was like, well, this is interesting. I don't know what to make of it. But Evil Dead 2 in particular was the one that I think I went like, whoa, what is this? I don't quite get this. This is both scary and funny. And I'd seen horror comedy sort of, but I was having trouble reconciling the tone of it because I hadn't seen anything with that tone at the time, because there's like the slapsticky stuff. And I mean, I think it's much funnier now than I did then. I mean, I think I laughed at it, but I think there was part of me that's like, am I supposed to be laughing? And that was a weird, surreal moment in cinema for me, was to be questioning my own response. Is what am I supposed to be feeling right now? Because the movies, to the point that I had been watching, were really straight ahead. These are the good guys. These are the bad guys. You're happy when the bad guys get destroyed. And, it was very, again, just straightforward. And this was something different. And I just remember being scared and laughing and not really knowing what to make of that movie. But I think that movie in particular, which is one of my favorite, horror comedy films or horror films of all time to this day, really turned a corner for me, because it also made me I was already somewhat aware of stylistic things through, like, Sergio Leone had really been one that I hadn't fully grasped it at the time, but here's a guy who's really directing a movie, and so Sam Raimi is obviously doing the same thing. There's all kinds of incredible shots on a very low budget in Evil Dead 2 and the first Evil Dead. And I just really was taken with that. And I think it pushed me to become more obsessed with horror. I'd seen some Friday the 13th movies and things like that, but I got more into that because of that movie. And it was through my good friend that I got my first video store job. He had gotten it a few months before me. There was a Blockbuster Video. It was a franchise location near us. It wasn't a corporate location. So, I mean, the difference being is that we could play movies on the TVs in the Blockbuster, which is kind of fun if they were PG-13 or less. So he played a lot of Fletch, if I recall. Um, but anyway, so it was between that experience watching those movies and then going to work at the video store as a junior in high school, and then carrying that job from high school to college. I transferred to the University of Wisconsin. They had a location on campus, another franchise Blockbuster. I worked there all through college. So I think that was like 2 years in high school, then 4 years in college. And then I didn't really necessarily jump right into the employment pool right after college. So I had a couple years in Madison after I graduated where I was still working as a manager at this Blockbuster Video before I moved to California and sort of shifted my direction. But I really do feel like my best friend in high school was a big influence on that, either directly or happenstance in a way through the movies and the job and everything. Once I got the video store job, it just really, everything amped up because you just have this access that is so crazy. So that's a long answer, but that's kind of it. That's kind of where I started.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned I mean, you mentioned so many things, but let me say also, no, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And A Clockwork Orange, and you first of all, you mentioned the VHS recording system, EP mode. So on a regular VHS tape, that would have given about what, 6 hours, right?
Yeah,
A regular, like a 2 hour tape would have given, stretched it out to 6, right? So yeah, that would be, you'd they have to give up a little bit in terms of the image quality, just a little bit, but it was totally worth it, right? And
yeah,
and I was I too was very much into that as well. And then you also mentioned Evil Dead 2, and it suddenly dawned on me that I don't know how you felt or what your experience was, but I do remember this period. I was also growing up a child of the 80s, and at the time I was living in the US and the United Kingdom for a little bit. And there were video stores as well. And I remember, for whatever reason, and maybe this is true for a lot of people, but I remember that there would have been a lot of films where I saw the sequel first, and Evil Dead 2 was one of those. And I saw that Evil Dead 2 before I saw Evil Dead. And
same
so,
here.
but right, and I think it feels like its own little movie.
Mm.
And it has the 2 on the end of it, and so you think, oh, okay, there's a film before that. And so, but you watch Evil Dead 2 and you can really keep up with what's going on. The same was true for me with what was that film? Ghoulies. Ghoulies 2, right? Ghoulies 2 was the one I
Yes.
saw first. And because we couldn't find a copy of Ghoulies in our local video store. It would have been in the UK at the time. And so I saw Ghoulies 2, and I love Ghoulies 2. I think it's just a really
Oh,
fun time. Yeah.
it's better than the first movie without question.
And I was so the first one built up so much in my mind. I'm thinking, my goodness, if Ghoulies 2 is like this, then my goodness, the first one must be just the best thing in the world. And I saw it, and okay, that's interesting. And so it had a different style and tone altogether, which I thought was quite fascinating. And the Ghoulies 2 then turned it into its own. It's like, I don't know if maybe Alien and Aliens. Maybe that's not such a good analogy, but in other words, my point is that there was a real shift in tonal dynamics between the first film and the second film. But I hadn't prepared for that because Ghoulies 2 was the first film I saw, and so I mean, this is the sort of thing that I went through as a kid, because there were such limitations on the one hand in terms of the video store selection, right? But on the other hand, it was just like heaven on earth,
Oh
because
yeah.
you could just go through and spend hours there, and it was like a family event. It was like, my parents would say, okay, let's go to the video store, and we'd all be I'd be so excited and get into the car and just be just eager to see what's going on, and going to the store, and then if there are new releases, that would be great, but then just being so heartbroken when all the new releases would be out. They'd all be rented out, and oh my goodness, I have to wait another week or something like that. Or even better, if you could reserve a copy ahead of time, that would have been the coolest thing. So you could have been the first kid on the block to watch such and such film. on a given week in a given year in the 80s or 90s. And so
Well, and I remember too in working at video stores, you would occasionally have a hot Friday or Saturday night where somebody really wanted something and they would literally just stand there and wait as hoping that someone would return the tape. I'm just trying to imagine how, folks of this generation who and don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-streaming. I think it's a great tool and we use it all the time. And my kids have really taught me not to be precious about physical media. Not that I'm not, I will be always, but they obviously interact with streaming a lot more and they understand it and that's what they do. And so that's fine. But just the idea that a kid would be like, wait, I can't click play now. I have to wait until someone else lets go. And then it just is a crazy thought to even think about.
it's really amazing. Just it feels like not so long ago from my vantage point. I mean, I guess if we look at the straight numbers of the amount of years that have passed, I guess it is a long time ago, relatively speaking. But from my vantage point, it just feels like only yesterday that we were going to the video store, and only yesterday that it was the Blockbuster thing, and the idea too that you had to put the video in the slot, the return slot,
Yes.
before whatever the time was in order to count as being a return for the day that sort of
Mm-hmm.
dynamic, and then rewinding and not rewinding, and just yeah, all these little details that, of course, now we are living in a different age, and it's a glorious renaissance age in terms of the availability of things, of course, as we have discussed. But at the same time, there is a kind of quaint charm and a lovely feeling of that community atmosphere of just going there, and just having it be a wonderful event like it was for me anyway. And also too, I don't know how you felt too, but uh, I was also a big fan of horror films and genre films. And uh, I remember getting such a big thrill for whatever reason. There was a tape. I forget what it was exactly. I wish I could remember, but I was so taken with the trailers, because the trailers, that would be the only way to watch trailers for the most part, and before YouTube, before the internet, right? But I remember being so excited for two trailers in particular. One was The Exorcist 3,
Nice.
right? And this was really huge, and this was, I guess it was more reflective of what the original planned Exorcist 3 film was before the final theatrical release. I'm not sure exactly, but it was so cool, and it had the music, and that was great. And the other one was Dario Argento's opera, and it
Oh,
was called Terror at the Opera. And that was also something that was really intense, especially for me living in the United Kingdom at the time. Dario Argento films were very, very difficult or impossible to get in a kind of uncut form. And so those were really exciting. So those trailers too, on top of the film experience of the tapes themselves, were really exciting for me. I don't know how you felt about that, but
oh yeah. No, that was a big deal. Those trailers, God, it's so funny that you say I'm so used to now just being able to look up any trailer you want. But yeah, no, I mean, now that I think about it, obviously did see trailers in the theaters, but the primary source of my viewing was VHS. And so you are a captive audience to whatever trailer they happen to throw on. And obviously they thought about it. It's like they're renting a horror movie. Here are some horror trailers from the same company or whatever. And yeah, that stuff was really, um, captivating, really stirred the imagination and made you want to run back to the store. And you might finish a movie and go, well, that was pretty good, but that trailer for that other movie, I want to go get that now. So there was a lot of that for sure for me.
what were some examples of the films in particular that you saw during this time? You mentioned Clockwork Orange and Evil Dead 2 on those tapes. That was on this really intriguing, almost card catalog type of dot matrix printout system, which is fascinating in and of
Yeah,
itself, right?
that's great.
And oh, that's a wonderful system, right? But what are some other titles or films that you remember seeing? They could be VHS, or you mentioned the drive-in theater experience and the movie theater experience. What were some of the films, just examples of these that you remember in particular?
Well, I think the next sort of phase for me came when I was working at the college video store. I discovered, and actually have the book right here, Danny Perry's Cult Movies. So I discovered that book, and I started flipping through it, and it's still one of my favorite books of all time. Along with, I also have Guide for the Film Fanatic, which is my favorite book of all time. And in fact, for the video audience, I have a tattoo of the cover of Guide for the Film Fanatic. So anyway, Danny Perry was huge, huge for me, and I started to get into his books and the movies he was recommending. So I'm remembering things like Eraserhead and Rock and Roll High School, which is still one of my favorite movies of all time. Sunset Boulevard. Oh man, I was just flipping through this book, and it was like every page is, like I saw Detour. The noir Forbidden Planet, one of my favorite movies. I mean, there's so much good stuff in here. Just this, and then he did 3 volumes of those. So I found cult movies at my university library, and then I found Cult Movies 2 and Cult Movies 3. And then a friend of mine turned me on to Guide for the Film Fanatic, which is, a little different format. Like Cult Movies books, for those that haven't seen them, are Danny Perry writing a synopsis and then a really interesting essay about each of the films. And they were fascinating because he would put something like Casablanca in the book, and you'd read his essay and it would be totally different than any essay you'd ever read. Not that I had read a ton on Casablanca at that time, but it was different. He had a different take, and his take and his outlook on movies was always, and the same thing with these books, there's a lot of high and low art. You have, some really oddball cult movies combined with some really great high-end art house and classic cinema, and they're all together in the same book. It's almost like he's saying all of these are of equal value to you, whatever you think. Basically check these out for yourself. And I may not like something, but I'm not necessarily saying don't see it. And I think that philosophy burned into my brain so much that it has informed not only my sort of view on cinema in general, but also the podcasts. I'm all about that stuff. I mean, if you listen to me talk about movies on Just the Dis and Pure Cinema, I'm always sort of mixing high and low art, the cheesiest horror film with occasionally art house is still not necessarily my go-to, but I definitely appreciate that stuff, art house and foreign films, but classic film. I mean, I'm all over the place, and he has sort of informed that sensibility, if you will. So yeah, I just remember, seeing a lot of those movies I mentioned, and then seeking them out because I remember at the video store I worked at, Blockbuster, they allowed us this system where I could search the rudimentary computer system and find, let's say, like, for example, I remember 2 movies that I got for our store. I got Eraserhead and I got Rock and Roll High School because I could find them at another location, and I would call that location and I would say, so we're putting together this section. That was the other thing. Oh, I forgot. I loved, and this is all part of my curating sickness, my curating mentality, is I started creating sections at the video store. So I created an 80s section. We had a section called College Classics, which were movies that were just really popular on campus. They would get checked out all the time. We put them all in one spot. And then I had a cult section, which was very much informed by Danny Perry's book. And so I was creating that cult section. I was looking for movies to fill it. I filled it with all the movies I could find in the store already. But I would call these other stores and I would say, hey, looks like you have a copy of Eraserhead, which at the time was an incredibly rare VHS tape. You could not get Eraserhead. And I said, well, if you don't mind, maybe check and see how your rentals are on that. And if they're low enough, maybe you could send me your copy because we're an on-campus location. We have this cult section. And almost always the people would look, and these movies tended to be, kind of not as popular in a Blockbuster setting. So I would get whatever I want. I got a few of them that way. I definitely remember getting Eraserhead and the wonderful, I still have this, and I actually got Alan Arkers to sign it, the clamshell VHS of Rock and Roll High School, which is just wonderful. And I have that in my garage somewhere. I got to find it. But anyway, so those were some of the big ones. It was cult movies was the next thing for me. And then that sort of has informed my cinematic discoveries moving forward, really.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And so, as you mentioned, you developed a wide-ranging taste in cinema, and you made a lot of discoveries along the way, and that has informed where you are as a film enthusiast now. Now that I mean, you've mentioned a couple of titles that I think I certainly know and appreciate and love as well. Now that you are where you are now, what are some of those films in particular that I mean, you don't have to come up with. I know it's very difficult to come up with your favorite films of all time, something like that, because I would assume that for you maybe it's very big or it
Yeah,
changes depending on the day or depending on the season or the mood,
totally.
right? And I feel the exact same way. But now where you are now today, right now, what are some titles that you think in particular where you are now that you would consider to be very important to you for whatever reason?
Sure. No, a lot of these do end up coming back to those cult movie books and the Guide for the Film Fanatic, if I'm honest. I can't think of one in the group I'm going to give you that doesn't come in some way from one of those books. I can't understate how important Danny Perry was to me in terms of filming, sort of formatively setting me on the path and making me feel. It was around that time that I was actually changing my major from uh, it was a marine biology type thing to film, and he just sort of was all part of the mix that made me understand that film was something that was okay to study, and it was important, and it was interesting, and it really pushed my life in a different direction. So anyway, that said, I think for me the go-to films are things like Rio Bravo, one of the great westerns of all time. I love It's a Gift. The W.C. Fields film, I think, is one of my favorite, maybe my favorite comedy. A close second would be After Hours. Scorsese's After Hours is incredibly funny and rewatchable. There is Night Moves, Arthur Penn's film Night Moves, with Gene Hackman, which is a sort of a postmodern noir detective thing with Gene Hackman. I think I just said that. He really nails this postmodern noir thing, and it's a movie that I've come back to, and each time I've sort of fallen more and more in love with it. So that one's a huge one for me. And then trying to think here, Over the Edge, the sort of teenage rebellion, kids take over their middle school, kind of ties into Rock and Roll High School, which is also, as I mentioned, one of my favorites. Those are some of the big ones of late that I'm thinking are the most important to me.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Yeah, there was that kind of kids taking over the school genre. I mean, it kind of extended from a little bit before that, but
Yeah, If, I think, is one of the
yeah,
Lindsay Anderson film is one of the early ones. I know Arcus talks directly about how If was a big influence on Rock and Roll High School.
yeah, and so right, and so and that's right. That's it's amazing. Right now, we think about the films that we were really into, let's say in the '80s or growing up, and we realize, or we're in a position to be able to research and discover that they had their antecedents or the inspiration or the works that came before. I find that kind of exploration to be so doubly fascinating, and seeing what came before and how that influenced what I came to love as a child growing up. So
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100% on that, and I would say, in sort of conjunction with our earlier talk about children and what you show your kids, I think one of the key things that has helped me get my kids into older films is to show them a newer film. And then, I mean, this is a basic example, but let's say you show your kid Monster Squad, and then they go, well, okay, cool, that was fun. And then you go, okay, well, do you know who Frankenstein is? Do you know who the Mummy is? Do you know who the Creature from Black Lagoon is? And so then you go backwards, and then you show them that stuff. And I did the same thing with my daughter, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which I think is a great. I mean, it's a little scary, so it could scare some kids, but I think it's a great gateway to black and white films. I think that's one that a lot of people go to, but I really find the idea of, and I did this a lot with my son too, where I'd be like, okay, we're going to watch this movie, and then we're going to watch these other movies that are sort of the preceding influence to that. And for them to see those connections and make them on their own, even though I was sort of pointing them in that direction, I think was really helpful in sort of pushing them further into the love of cinema and cinema feeding off itself and just the living, breathing thing that is movies, basically.
This is such an important point, and I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to ask you this as well, which is, so obviously you have throughout your entire life up to now and going forward from now, you obviously consider cinema to be a very personal family experience. I mean, you mentioned, what was it, Clint Eastwood films, you growing up, and I have a similar kind of thing. You know, my father was a huge fan of Clint Eastwood, and he loved The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I just remember he would be just randomly in the house, just whistling the theme song,
Nice.
right? And I would know, and he would just suddenly be whatever sitting at the kitchen table or something, talking with my mom in the kitchen, and suddenly he would just go like, "Wow," you know, just do that thing, the theme song, the Ennio Morricone theme song. And I think, and I was just a kid, like, what is this? What's going on? But it was so cool to me at the time, and
Yeah.
I grew to love The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I think primarily because of that. But I'm sorry, yeah. So then going back to that, the it was the sort of experience of watching films with your family. And now, right, as you have your family and then their children, watching films with them. So on the one hand, I know from my own personal experience, it does involve me showing them films, of course, that I deem appropriate for their age, of course, in terms of their content, but showing them something and maybe sharing that experience with them. But has the opposite occurred for you as well? In other words, have you seen films through the experience of watching them, say, with your children? And have they taught you something new, or have they allowed you to see films in a different way that you perhaps might not have seen otherwise, had it not been for the experience of watching them with your children, or what your children had to say about these films?
Yeah, no, I mean, there definitely is a perspective there that I'm not privy to. I mean, a lot of times there's so much, I don't want to say baggage, but like you have nostalgia, you have so much tied up in these films, and they have none of that. And they may really lay it on the line in terms of like, Dad, I just don't like this movie. And so that's one. But the other thing is just seeing how certain things, we were rewatching 16 Candles, for instance, recently. And there's just a lot of things in that movie that just don't date well at all. And so it was ultimately, I mean, I don't want to say my kids were totally calling out all the things that bothered me about the film, but I was much more aware of it in the context of showing my kids the movie. And I'm much more aware of a lot of that stuff, especially in 80s movies. I want to say there seems to be a lot more, I don't know, a lack of certain kinds of sensitivity that I prefer to have, at least when I'm showing my kids movies, you know? And so, yeah, there's definitely a lot of, I think for me, it's not as much always about the sort of comments that they have, but it's sort of me watching again through the eyes of A, myself now, and B, myself now as a parent. And what is this saying? And how did I miss this big thing that's totally ridiculous that I can't believe didn't bother me back when I was a kid, kind of thing. So there's a lot of that, I would say. I mean, it's not incredibly overwhelming, but I have noticed it a little bit more recently as we've been trying to revisit some 80s favorites with the kids in the past couple years.
Yeah, this is such a very interesting point, and I've also mentioned this a little bit, but I'm so intrigued that you mentioned it as well. You know, for example, when I was a kid growing up, for whatever reason, I saw horror films, really violent 80s horror films when I was whatever it would have been, maybe 6 or 7 or something like this, so quite young. And for instance, like Halloween 2, I saw when
Oof.
I was very young, and uh, Halloween for that matter. I remember seeing like Halloween 3 also. That was released around the time I was a kid. And other films of that nature, right? Because of the video store experience, which is, I think for me, it was a lot of fun because I grew up loving this sort of stuff. But now that I'm a parent, right, I can't imagine showing my kid, right? It wouldn't happen, right?
Yeah.
My 6 year, my oldest daughter is now 8. I have a younger son who is 3. I cannot condone. I wouldn't show them anything like that. I mean, I have, for instance, like the bird with the crystal plumage in the back here, or like Tetsuo. And once I leave the room, I'll put these away, and then just make sure that it's sort of out of sight, or the room is otherwise off limits, because that's another thing too. I'm so concerned about too, is just making sure that even the covers are out of sight, because I like some of these covers. I mean, we spoke about the video store experience, but also some of these covers of the films that you and I think really like. Maybe, for instance, you were speaking about Scream Factory on Just the Discs a few weeks ago with our dear friend Stephanie. And for instance, like some of the John Carpenter films, In the Mouth of Madness. I think that cover art is beautiful, but it's a little bit, I don't know if I want my 3-year-old necessarily to sort of see that. I mean, it would be, maybe some people are okay with that, but I'm always very conscious of that. Or like the Arrow release of like Zombie, Fulci Zombie, or some of the other Fulci films. I think I'm always concerned about that sort of stuff as well, and just not having them scared about something going forward. So I'm very, very careful. I try to be as careful as I can about this sort of stuff. And I don't know if you feel the same way about this, especially in terms of your love of genre films and the like. So.
Well, I do, yes. I do try to. It's really, to be honest, it's a little hard to keep all the covers away from my daughter, because I got to be straight. We got a lot of Blu-rays in this house, and it's hard to turn every single bad cover around. So there have been occasions where I'll forget that something's out, and she'll be like, "What is this movie?" And I'll be like, "Oh dear." And so then I'll have to explain it, and I'll try to be gracious about that. But I think the other thing about showing your kids movies is really, you have to allow, I mean, you can have two approaches. One is to be extremely protective and play conservative all the time, and I totally respect that point of view. I totally get it. I think for me, I have occasionally tried to push a little harder than maybe I should have, and that sometimes is a mistake. And that is a learning experience as a parent. Whoops, I did that. I shouldn't have done that. I thought they were ready for this, but they were not. And I think the other thing too is to make sure that your child is open and communicative about what they are comfortable with. And when they are not comfortable, they need to know that they should and have to say, "Mom or Dad, I'm not comfortable with this," and it goes off. And that's a very simple way to sort of circumvent those problems, but you may have already caused the damage. It may have been too late. And I definitely have done that. And I do have some guilt about it, but I have been occasionally surprised, pleasantly so, that my daughter was more ready for something more in terms of sophistication than, like, let's say, scary horror. I've tried to not push too far into that, because then you run into the problems of like, can I sleep in your bed tonight and all that stuff. And that's just I don't want to go down that road. I'm just trying not to go there. So really it's much more about like, what is sophisticated in a certain way in the storytelling, or what is a stepping stone to a more sophisticated kind of film. And those are the ones that I really track. Like, what did they think of X movie, and did they understand the intricacies of this plot or these characters, and did they enjoy it? And then moving sort of, each one becomes a building block onto another. Anyway, so the short answer is yes, I am definitely conscious of those things. I, as a parent, probably lean a little bit more into the idea that I don't want to say that our parents had, but just being a little more open about it. But I totally respect and completely understand any parent's desire to be as restrictive as they choose to be about what they show their kids. I totally get that. The upside for me, I will say though, is that, again, she has shown to understand and appreciate movies that I know I never would have been able to get at 9, 10, 11 years old, because I sort of allowed her the access. So it's a tough line, because you really do appreciate as a parent that you're like, oh, my kid really enjoyed this movie that I think is a little more, and I don't want to say adult in like a sexual way or whatever, but just more complicated than your everyday plot. And they got it and they understood it. And sometimes the other great thing is when they start to, and I've talked about Raven specifically on the podcast, sometimes she starts to understand the machinations of plots. This is this kind of movie. This is the kind of thing that happens next. And she will start to predict things that will happen like a machine. And it is kind of remarkable. And my wife and I will just look at each other going, wow, I wouldn't have figured that out at that age. So there's an intelligence that she's tapping into that is really rewarding to see. So you get hooked on that stuff too. It becomes very complex, you know?
I think that is that is really great, and I look back on my own watching a childhood watching experience also with a lot of fondness. I think also you mentioned about your daughter and how she can begin to anticipate and how she's sort of playing that sort of three-dimensional chess type of game that we all, I think, experience in when we are watching a lot of films, right? And I think that's really wonderful and really getting the mind excited and stimulated. And also, there's also just a lot of what's the phrase? There's a lot of stimuli that's coming from the screen. And I think that comes in visual form and also in audio form, in words. I mean, I mentioned this a long time ago, but I remember very fondly about the film Hellbound Hellraiser 2. And there was a particular moment in that film where a very key character says something like, what's the what was today's agenda? Yes, evisceration. And he says, and right? Maybe you remember the moment, right? And I remember when I was a kid, what does evisceration mean? I don't know what that means, but so I'll look it up. But there's a dictionary or something, and I said, oh, that's what it means. Okay. And then years later, I think it came up on a test. And so but it was like, oh, right, I remember this word and what it means
awesome.
because of Hellbound Hellraiser 2. And so it was, I think, there's a lot of stuff that can be said in terms of the direct visual impact and the storytelling, but also the types of stimuli that films like this afford, because they're being written by many different types of screenwriters and filmmakers and the like. And so yes, I think that's a very admirable approach, really quite wonderful. And I must ask you, you mentioned about how many Blu-rays that you have, or you hinted at how many Blu-rays or titles. Can I ask approximately how many titles could you say that you have, let's say all inclusive of regardless of format? So Blu-ray, DVD, VHS, Laserdisc, I'm not sure, but whatever format it is, how many titles overall would you say that you have right now?
Unfortunately, I haven't done something which I should do, which I know a lot of collectors have, which is, using one of those apps or what have you to sort of catalog and keep track of everything that you have. My cataloging system is a little bit disorganized. I have groups, I'll have a Criterion section. I have a Scream Factory section. I have a Twilight Time section. Trying to think. And then I have sort of just pockets of things, and I know where things are for the most part. And not a lot of people come over and see the collection, so it doesn't really need to be organized. But that said, I haven't really counted. I think my wife counted at one point many years ago. It feels like 4 or 5 years ago, and she thought we had something like 5,000 Blu-rays in the house then. And I feel like I've definitely upped it a good deal since then. And I don't know. I definitely have a few VHS tapes. Still some DVDs. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that's not available on Blu-ray that I keep all my DVDs for. And I have some Laserdiscs. I have some Criterion stuff, a few that haven't made the jump to DVD or Blu-ray. Bad Day at Black Rock is my favorite example of that, is that commentary is one of my favorite tracks. But I would guess, 6,000, 6,500, something. I don't know. It's hard to approximate, but that would be the low end guess that I would make. I could be wrong.
And what goes into your decision-making process now as to what titles you are going for? I mean, do you tend to get basically anything that's released by such and such a label, or do you try to be more of a discerning, selective consumer in terms of what you have, especially considering the type of podcasting work that you engage in with just the discs in particular, in terms of the collecting side of things.
Well, I mean, full disclosure, I mean, I thankfully, between the blog and the podcast, which is doing okay, you know, I don't know too many other, I mean, there are a few, but I don't know too many other Blu-ray centric podcasts. And so it's a small niche market in terms of that. And that said, I've gotten in touch with some labels and I'm able to get some things, some review copies, which I'm incredibly honored and appreciative of. So some of that decision making is removed for me. There are some things I get sent that I might not get, and there's some that I definitely want that I pursue with the label and say, I'd really love to cover this if you could. But I've become much more selective. I'm by no means, and nor will I ever be, this is a controversial statement, I will never be a Criterion completionist, because I love the collection. I appreciate the collection, but there are certain movies that as I've gotten older, and especially if I'm being completely honest right now, the only way that I'm able to sort of make it okay to spend any money on Blu-rays is to sell Blu-rays. So I'm having to go through my collection, strip it down, look at the things I've had for 5, 6, 7 years, some of which I've never opened, and realize, like, okay, how important is this film to me? I've not opened it in 5 years. Like, that is something. And if when I do want to watch that, maybe I could rebuy it if I really wanted to. But clearly I have, you know, the Blu-ray news is a constant cycle. I'm always excited about new things. So I really am always trying to get some new stuff, but I'm very selective about it. So it's a matter of honing the collection down and deciding what's important, deciding which special features laden discs might be the ones that would push me to get a disc that I might not otherwise get, you know, like an Al Adamson box set or something like that. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. I might not be my first choice, but I got it, you know, because I was very impressed with the overall package of what they had to offer at Severin. So I'm very selective. I'm very sort of like, I want that, I'll take this. I don't need that. I'm much more focused on what is some stuff I want to cover on the show right now. What is some stuff that it relates to topics we're covering on Pure Cinema. For instance, I have a upcoming topic that might relate to Darren Aronofsky's movie Pi, and I had to go and find an import of that on Blu-ray because it's not available in the States. And I was like, okay, that's one I can justify buying right now because I want to see it again. I want to research this movie. So those are some of the things that inform my decisions. And some is coming back to like cult films that I've loved for years. And this is a very timely thing. And then I just got this yesterday, but for instance, it doesn't have any special features, but Sony just put out Ruben and Ed on Blu-ray, which is an incredibly weird cult movie that I've loved since my college days at the video store when we had that in our cult section. And that movie I never thought would see the light of DVD, let alone Blu-ray. So that's a first day purchase for me, those kind of things. So movies that are very special to me that I've been waiting a long time to have on Blu-ray, I'm definitely doing that. And then some of the bells and whistles genre stuff and Criterion, you know, is definitely a big, again, I don't get everything, but they're classic film releases. A lot of them are must-haves for me, and they still do a lot of cult cinema stuff. And I don't know, I'm just trying to think. The last one I think I got from Criterion was Lady Eve, which I actually just talked about on a recent episode of Just the Dis. So there's a lot of, again, my taste is pretty wide-ranging, but there's no label for me that is an all-in, must-have everything they do kind of thing. I believe much more in self-curation, and I can appreciate people who allow a label to curate for them. I think that is a very cool way to discover new things. But I'm, for the most part, I'm still trying to discover things. I still blind buy things. I just blind bought The Caller from Vinegar Syndrome, which I've never seen, with Malcolm McDowell. So that'll be a discovery for me. But they are the ones I think I tend to take more chances on, is the Vinegar Syndrome titles. They're a very intriguing label at this time. So anyway, a long answer, but it's a very discerning, complicated process as to what I really purchase.
That is so great, and I respect that wholeheartedly, very much so. And you know, we are all in our own specific, particular situations, both in terms of our of our whatever it might be, professional situation or financial situation, and also cinematic journey situation. And so you're absolutely, I think your approach is splendid, and I respect it 100%. I think it's brilliant, and it of course has not only for your own cinematic journey, which is of primary importance, of course, but also for the benefit of the film community at large, because as a result of this experience, you are providing us with your great commentary on your podcast. So I think this is something's right in that direction. You know what I mean? So I think
very kind.
That's really wonderful. I mean, I'm intrigued also. You mentioned about your blind buying experience, which is the idea of buying a film that one hasn't seen and not one maybe doesn't necessarily know a lot about. And so it is a kind of a, what's the phrase, a kind of a risk in many ways, because Blu-rays, unless it's a sale and unless it's a really good, decently priced label, Blu-rays can tend to be not the cheapest things around, right? And so sometimes it can be a risk. It certainly is for me. I certainly feel that way. And so I wonder, what were some examples of these types of films that you didn't see before that you were really surprised by? And then the opposite too, what were some films that you were maybe, I maybe, well,
All right, let's see. Well, Discoveries, I mean, just briefly, Discoveries is a big deal to me. I mean, again, I think that goes way back to Danny Perry, but I have an ongoing list that I keep. I highly recommend Letterboxd if people don't use it. I think it's pretty incredible, and it's just, I mean, we've even thought Pure Cinema should try and pursue a sponsorship from Letterboxd because we use it so much. It's really one of the key things I use for podcasting and logging films. You just log your films. You can make private lists, which I do all the time for the podcast. I'll make a private list and you put your titles in there. You can make little notes. But I have an ongoing list of film discoveries from any given year. And one of my favorite series that we run on Rupert Pupkin Speaks is Film Discoveries. And that usually is films that were 20 years older or so that you saw for the first time in a given year. And so that's something I definitely think about all the time. I think a lot of times the discoveries I make are related to Blu-rays now that I think about it. I'm trying to think what I have discovered recently. The other thing that I find, and I don't know if you have this, but I definitely have a thing now where I'll watch a movie and I'll be like, I know I've seen this movie, or I think I have. And then I'll watch it and I will suddenly not remember it, and then I'm conflicted about, do I count this as a discovery because I swear I've seen this movie, but I'm suddenly really wholly experiencing it for the first time. Like, for instance, I watched a movie last night called All Night Long. It's from 1980 or 81. It has Gene Hackman and Barbara Streisand and Diane Ladd and Dennis Quaid, and it's basically like I guess the closest thing I can compare it to would be something like Lost in America, but it's much more low key than that. It's like Hackman is a corporate, middle level corporate guy who has some kind of a meltdown and he attacks one of his coworkers. He throws a chair out a window and I think there's some tenure that he has so that they can't fire him. So they demote him from a corporate position to running like a night drugstore, like a Walgreens, and it's in a bad part of a particular city. And so he's suddenly thrust into this totally weird situation that as a corporate guy, he's not really used to dealing with. And he's a very intelligent guy, but so it's a very low key sort of midlife crisis dramedy. And I really liked it. Like, I liked it a lot, and I thought I had seen it, but I really didn't remember a lot of it. So I'm counting it as a discovery. That came out from Kino. That's one recently. I'm trying to remember the bad stuff. I don't remember as much, but because I wouldn't count that in my list necessarily. But I did see Abbott and Costello Go to Mars, and I wouldn't say it's bad by any means because I'm going to count it in my list. But this came out as part of the Abbott and Costello box set, which Shout Factory put out, which is one of my favorite releases of last year. Incredible set, just all-inclusive, amazing set. and it had a bunch of Abbott and Costello movies. I actually did a podcast with my friend James. His show is called Wrong Reel, which is a really great podcast. They do a lot of deep dives, and we did an Abbott and Costello episode. So I watched a bunch of stuff I hadn't seen for that. Abbott and Costello Go to Mars, not as good as I had hoped, but still interesting. And then in terms of other stuff, I'm trying to think of what other things I've you might appreciate this. I bought a movie called oh shoot, I'm just looking at my list right now. Edge of the Axe. It was a slasher movie from Spain. Arrow put it out. A friend of mine, Jackson Stewart, who directed Beyond the Gates, which is a movie I really like, actually had him on Just This talking about Edge of the Axe because he's such a fan of it. And it's a really weird slasher movie, but I want to count it as a discovery from this year that I saw for the first time. So that's one. I'm trying to think if there's any other. One that Raven really responded to is The Point from 1971. It's an animated film with Ringo Starr as a narrator, and it's got songs by Harry Nilsson. MVD Rewind Collection put that out this year. And she really liked that one. And that one that was one where I watched it and enjoyed it, but I definitely enjoyed it more because she enjoyed it. And it's become one that she's asked to rewatch, which I know is always a good sign. So those are just a handful of those.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I don't want to, I just for the, at the risk of perhaps forgetting this question, I should also ask one more question before I move on, which is that, you also mentioned on top of the physical media collecting that obviously you're engaged with, you also are watching films, or maybe your family are watching films through streaming services too. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
How does that figure into your own cinema consumption now? I mean, do you rely on it a lot, would you say, or do you think maybe it's 50-50, or do you think that maybe it's nice as it is, but maybe there's still a little ways to go in terms of streaming and the types of films that are made available that are things that you'd be interested in? What's your take on streaming now and your own film consumption?
That's a good question. I would say for me, it's probably 50-50. Personally, for me, it's probably 50-50. But with my family, I would say it's probably like 80-20. Like it's a really high percentage streaming. It's just the interface. I mean, here's the other thing is that I love Blu-rays, and a lot of them have a continue function. They will remember where you are when you stop them. But streaming is pretty great for that. And I will say that my wife, she works really hard, and she gets tired at a certain time of the evening, usually when we start movies. And so there are times when we have to split a movie over a couple nights, which is not ideal, but it's just become part of the process. And so it's great to have a streaming service where you're just like, Vudu is our go-to portal, if I'm being honest. And we'll go and watch part of a movie and then have to pause it, and we'll come back the next night. We'll pop that movie up, and it's right back where we left off. So it's really convenient in that way. But in terms of the quality, we have a pretty good internet provider, so I haven't had a lot of the issues that people have with streaming. I don't have a lot of buffering problems. So that if that started to play in, I'm sure that the Blu-ray and the family numbers would go up. But for the most part, the streaming stuff we use. My wife and my son and I have been on a streak of watching horror movies a lot. We don't do that with Raven, but with him we do. And so we go to Shudder pretty frequently. That's definitely a service we use. And I use Criterion Channel myself a lot for research for Pure Cinema. I just watched John Dillman, the Chantal Ackerman movie for an episode we did recently. And that was also, by the way, one of my favorite discoveries of the year that I hadn't seen for whatever reason to this point. I know there's a Blu-ray of it, which I may get at some point, but I did see that streaming through the Criterion Channel. So it's actually kind of a major part of our viewing experience, if I'm honest. It's just what we use. It's what we we use it much like you would use the wall of a video store. It's like, okay, let's flip through the newest stuff that we've gotten recently. And the other thing I would recommend to everybody is that they use the Just Watch app. That is essential for me because it is my go-to when my wife maybe suggests it. She'll go sometimes and look up a list of movies like, oh, what about this? And I'll go, okay, well, I don't own that digitally or on Blu-ray, but oh, it's on Hulu, because Just Watch is an aggregator that sort of keeps track of everything that's streaming everywhere. And I want to say it's about 95% accurate. Occasionally they'll have titles that won't be where they say they'll be, but they usually has to do with certain streaming services like Hoopla. I remember has a lot of problems with maybe regionally. I don't know. Some things don't show up there when they say they should, but so I use Just Watch all the time in terms of finding movies to not have to purchase or rent them if I don't have to. If I'm already paying for a streaming service that has them, it's an essential tool to sort of make the most of the streaming services I do have. I use it a lot, I gotta say. I mean, as much as I'm Mr. Physical Media and I love Blu-rays, and obviously you can't get as much of the audio commentaries or the interviews. And I mean, the Criterion channel has a lot of that. So that's great. And I'm very thankful for that because I know a lot of younger people use that. And at least they can experience physical media in that sense through the channel. But yeah, I use it more than you would think, ultimately.
This is such a very good point too, because streaming services are, I think they provide, as you say, such convenience and wealth of access to all these films. I mean, I don't subscribe to the Criterion channel, not because I dislike streaming, but just because of my own physical circumstances at the moment. And so that prevents me from being able to subscribe. But if I were in a situation where I could, I certainly would. And so I'm very much supportive of it. Also, I've received a lot of discussions and comments from people maybe who are younger and maybe who are students or not necessarily. In other words, Blu-rays can be very expensive. And over time, to purchase a lot of Blu-rays is a very it's a big deal in terms of spending. And so, and having to wait for sales, and even at sales, they aren't necessarily the cheapest things in the world, right? And so, and we think of, let's say, Criterion as an example, and these are pretty expensive things, very expensive. And so, to have like a channel where you can have access at a set price that is, relatively speaking, quite reasonable, and you can have people to watch all these films in a library. And the library, let's take Criterion as an example, is even more extensive than the physical media catalog. I mean, there's a time limit. I understand things expire. I get that. But just in terms of the whole the wealth of the streaming library, I mean, it's immense and vast, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And so I think that it's essential, I think, for a lot of people, and good for everyone who uses it, because it's, as I say, and it can be a great way. It's sort of like, as you say, the interface is the video store experience that we had looking at the shelf of videos that were lined up on the wall there. So that's a great analogy.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not as cool as being able to pick up a cover box. I know we were talking off mic about things like, I remember Metamorphosis and the Dead Pit and things like where they had an interactive cover box. It's obviously not that, and it never will be that, but it's close enough, I think, and so that helps, But yeah, that tactile, being able to pick up something, I don't know. There's a different vibe to that ultimately, but it is what it is, and I think that's the thing, is I'm just trying to kind of go with the trends in some ways, because that is where the future of cinema is kind of going in some respects. I mean, I will always push for physical and push people to collect if they can. But like you say, it's a reasonable price, and the access to something like Criterion Channel, where it is impeccably curated. Their series are the noir westerns. I mean, the things they're doing there are just so neat, and it is stuff that isn't available in the collection itself. They're licensing from Columbia or Warner Brothers or whoever. and they're doing a really great job there. So, if that is what you can afford, I totally respect and understand it, and I hope you use that. I just find the tools that you can afford and the portals you can afford, and make that your way to discover things ultimately, because a lot of them are there for you to find things, and I think that's the harder part, is just finding things sometimes. But it's still great.
No, I couldn't have said it better, my friend. I think that's great. But and at the same time too, we are still living in an age where Blu-rays and now 4K and maybe DVDs and like those are still available. And then the used market in terms of laser discs or VHS, those are still available if one looks hard enough. And there are still places online and elsewhere where collectors can still find those particular versions of films, right? Because that's also part of the thing as well, that I think, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure exactly how streaming will answer this, which is the way in which we will be able in the streaming universe to be able to chart and to catch up with specific versions of a particular film, right? Because as you know, this can be one of the main points in trying to find a particular release of a particular film from a particular label, because it had whatever this particular supplement, or it was the long version with a particular, you know what I mean? And these sorts of iterations and changes over time to a particular film, it happens, I think, more often than we might realize as consumers. Sometimes, if we're lucky, we might have a situation like, let's say, the Star Wars films, where you have these that are very publicly announced. The special editions are publicly announced, and of course, it creates that whole dynamic of people, whatever version they prefer, if they prefer the non-specialized versions or not, and that sort of thing. But the point that I bring up is that at least there is the knowledge that these versions exist in some form, and that we can try to find them. Maybe if they're in a maybe physical media form, or Laserdisc, or the DVDs that were released a little bit later, of the non that were that weren't the special editions, etc. And so, but oftentimes too, this is not so clear. It's not so clear in the DVD and Laserdisc or physical media form, and I'm not sure how this will play out over time in streaming when that becomes the be all end all of home media consumption. In other words, if we are trying to find a specific version of a film, how can we find that in this digital streaming age? And so that's something that I'm still wondering about and curious about. And so that's not to say that I'm against streaming philosophically. I'm again, I've mentioned it before and I'll say it again, I'm very much into it. But these are still some open-ended questions that I have. It's not like Blu-ray is the answer to that, because as we know, Blu-rays and DVDs, right, there's a struggle with that as well. Sometimes we have to find a particular version that maybe isn't available, or suddenly quietly became unavailable in place of the new version. And so what's going on there? I mean, I think, and it's not like one version is better than the other, but it's just the idea of having access to them is, I think, very important, so that we can make up our own minds. And so I think that's one of the great beauties of physical media collecting, is just knowing where we can go and trying to find that particular release, and celebrating when something is actually released on disc that wasn't released, made available before. And so, but that's, I guess, the give and take of physical media and streaming, at least in my own approach and my own heart. But that, again, there are, I think, advantages to the formats depending on where we are. So anyway, sorry about going awful about that.
I'm with you.
Yeah. But and also I should mention too that I'm also a big fan of James Hancock in The Wrong Reel. I'm a very big fan of his work. I think he's doing such great work indeed. So I'm so glad that you mentioned him. But
He's fantastic.
Oh, fantastic! So versatile and so energetic. I mean, he's just can. I mean, I don't know. I mean, whatever he has for breakfast. I mean, I want to have the same breakfast, because if it means having the same level of energy, my goodness, he's
Yes.
just batteries charged all the way. It's fantastic.
100%.
But, yeah,
100%.
but I want to ask you now too about your podcasts, right? And what you of course, going back full circle, we started with a discussion of Just the Discs and Pure Cinema, and so without necessarily giving too much of the insider secrets away. What are some things that you'd like to talk about now? Maybe some episodes or themes that we might be looking forward to in the future? Any planned episodes that you have upcoming that you wanted to give us a little hint about right now? I certainly would love to hear about any upcoming episode plans that you might have that you're willing to share with us anyway.
Sure. I think probably by the time this goes up or close to it, we'll probably have already released for Pure Cinema a disaster movies episode. That was our next one. That's a topic that's very near and dear to me in particular, and Elric kind of finally gave in. I mean, it's not that he's not a fan of disaster movies, he definitely is, but I really like them a lot. Like I like some of my fall back kind of favorite subgenres are disaster movies, animal attacks movies. In terms of the genre, I love that stuff. At one point we'll do, I hope, an animal attacks episode, because I find that subgenre so fascinating. And so does Raven, by the way, which I find is really interesting. So that one's in the works. And then we have a 60s cult movies episode, which is coming later in September. And then we've got some horror stuff in the works. I'm not going to talk about that one too much specifically, but we have an early September episode that will be horror related. And we have more stuff that we're working on for October that will be horror related too, I hope. In terms of Just the Discs, I've got a lot. I've got a lot of stuff that I'm editing right now. I have an episode, as I mentioned, with Raven on the Bruce Lee box set. I have one that I really like, and I hope people will listen to, about music documentaries that I'm doing with my friend Brendan Small, who, by the way, that has been one of the joys of doing podcasts, is connecting with people that you admire. And I've been a fan of Brendan's for 20 years, basically, since I saw Home Movies for the first time. And then obviously he did Metalocalypse after that. And I love, his sense of humor and his voice. And it's been so neat to have his voice on Just the Discs. He's become a friend, ultimately. And that has been kind of mind-blowing. And so we have a regular thing where we're doing episodes all the time. We've done a bunch of horror and genre movies. But this one is one that was very specific to him. And it deals with two movies, Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, which Shout Factory put out on Blu-ray. That's a Chuck Berry movie. It's really great. Talking about discoveries, seeing Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll this year for the first time, I was blown away by the documentary. Even more fascinating is the behind the scenes on that documentary. There's so much extra stuff on that Blu-ray, including an hour-long sort of making of, which talks about the difficulties of working with Chuck Berry, and it's absolutely wonderful. So that's part one. But the second part is a DVD-only movie called Off the Charts, and it's all about those sort of companies, or basically one-horse operations, where you can write song lyrics, send them to somebody, and they will make a song for you and send the song back to you. They're called song poems. And so that's a huge favorite of Brendan's, and I had never seen it. And he and I had been talking about doing this episode for like a year. It's been a long time in the works. And we finally did it, and I just finished editing that one, and so that'll be out in a few weeks. But I'm really hoping people will check it out, and they won't look at it and go, music documentaries, that sounds boring. These movies are fantastic. And if you like movies like American Movie or Vernon, Florida, I'm just trying to think of quirky documentaries. Off the Charts is like that. And Off the Charts is another of my favorite discoveries of the year. So that's a great one that I'm doing. And then, of course, I have more episodes with Stephanie Crawford, who is, one of my favorite collaborators. I know you're a big fan of hers. She is fantastic. I can't praise Steph highly enough. She is one of my favorite people, and she's just such an informed collector and has such interesting taste in movies. We have done a few underrated / label centric episodes. We did a Criterion episode that was right around the time of the sale. We just put out that Scream Factory episode, which was really well received. It was underrated Scream Factory from our point of view. And we have a Kino Lorber underrated episode in the can that I'm going to edit and have out at some point. I also have another To Watch Pile episode with Aaron Pinn. I know you're a fan of Aaron Pinn. Along with you, one of my favorite YouTube personalities. So Aaron is great. And I'm going to continue to have episodes with Aaron moving forward. I'm trying to think. I think I have a few more in the can, but I'm blanking. But those are some of the things people can look forward to on Just the Dis and Pure Cinema coming up.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. You know, I'm just a huge fan of Aaron. I've mentioned his channel many times. Or
He's so great.
Yeah, and his knowledge and recall is astounding. Absolutely astounding, and just and it's like it's like a ball of energy. And just you get him talking about something that he loves, and it's just, oh my goodness, it's amazing. And then it's not just that, he's so considerate. He'll talk, and he'll just, during one of his live streams, he'll talk about something, and then he'll stop and say, look at the live chat, oh hi, how are you, know, and just, oh yeah, I remember that. And just so thoughtful, and he always listens, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember that, you know, and I think, and he's talking about strategies for sales, and you should do that. Oh my goodness, what a gentleman. I think he's fantastic. I would love the opportunity to talk with him here one day. And Stephanie too. I'm so glad you mentioned her. I'm just I'm amazed every time at her recall and the kind of attention to detail, especially, and the care that she gives to the films that aren't always mentioned, but that really should be. And it's just again, she reminds me all the time just how great and vast and wide this ocean expanse of cinema really is, and that every corner is deserving of attention, and she really gives that. And the way that she describes, I think it was the Scream Factory episode in particular. There was she described the film Visiting Hours.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and how it was like she was feeling like it was it because it's quite a mean film, I think, and she was describing it in those terms, and she was still saying it in a way that she was saying, oh, this is such as a horror film, it's great, but it felt mean, and it felt like it didn't like me or something like that. And I thought that was the perfect way to describe that, and it captured the essence, I think, in such a great way. You know, I have this way of talking too much, and I just talk and talk and talk, you know, but she just captured it perfectly, and it was great. And that's an example of, I think, how brilliant she is. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
No, she's such a great friend, a great collector, and a great voice to have on the show. I just feel like, obviously, collecting is a very dude-centric thing, and there's a lot of male voices in there, but I really appreciate and am so happy to have her on the show. I've had a lot of women comment about that, you know, just hearing a woman's voice talking about collecting, talking about cinema is a really, you know, wonderful thing, and she just has such great taste. So she's become a real integral part of the show, and I really kind of, I think of her as part of the identity of the show, really. Kind of, she's just one of those people. Same thing with Aaron. I really feel like those two are, you know, my kind of people that that really understand the mentality of collectors, which is what we're going for. We really are trying to make collectors not feel bad about the fact that they have this compulsion, you know, and what are the positives we can take from it? What are the things we can get excited about? And how can we save money? Steph's really good with sales and things like that. I take advice from her about that stuff all the time. So she is an essential part of the show. I'm so glad to have her on board.
I think that's absolutely fantastic, my friend. And looking forward to these episodes when they appear on my feed. I will listen to them, and as I'm maybe drinking my coffee on the table or something, and just
Nice.
suddenly I'll just like I remember listening to one of the episodes and I was just laughing out loud, and and people around like what is but that was okay with me, because it was just, that's the sort of reaction and response that the episodes at least elicit from me. And I think I speak for many people when I say that you are doing such fine work, excellent work, essential work. And I think we all benefit, truly do. We all benefit from the types of energy and enthusiasm that you you inspire, and that's shown obviously through the great guests that you have on your shows, but also you as a person, as an individual, as a gentleman and as a human being. I think you obviously, it's very clear to me and to everyone just how much you love cinema, and not just that, but the kind of thoughtfulness and care and kindness that you bring to every conversation, everything on and off the camera. I can attest to the fact that you are just like you are in a podcast. You are genuine in your podcasts, and you are friendly and kind, and you always show me such courtesy. And you don't even have to do that, but you do, and you take the time out of your very busy schedule when we talk. And so I really want to thank you for that, and thank you very much for being genuine and for being honest and being enthusiastic. And just please, let me speak for everyone when I say please keep up the excellent work, because we really need it, my friend.
Wow, that is so kind. I am just incredibly flattered. And as I was to hear that you're such a big fan, it's an honor to hear that. And as I said, I'm a fan of what you do, and I'm also a fan of your positivity and the energy that you put out. And I think that is definitely something that can get lost. And I think people experiencing interactions online about cinema or whatever, there can be a lot of negativity. And I understand, especially in 2020, boy, it's hard to stay positive, I'll tell you. But just the way you open your channel's videos, with, just making sure people understand that you care and that you hope they're okay. I believe that. And I think that's genuine. And I think you just have a very calming demeanor and an intelligence, and it's just a real delight to watch and listen to your videos. So you please keep up your work as well, sir. And I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, you're very kind. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm very, very, yeah, I don't quite know what to say. So, but thank you very much for that. But, oh goodness, I'm very honored indeed. But my friend, I don't want to keep you. I know that you're busy. And so, thank you so much for this. And please, if it's okay with you, would you be open to doing this again, hopefully very soon? We can continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
It was delightful. Totally delightful. I appreciate the invite, and I'd absolutely be down to do it again.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. That makes me very happy. The pleasure would be all mine. And, I think we've only just touched on a huge thing right under the surface, because I know that you have so many great things to say about so many films. And so I'd love to be able to speak to you again in the near future. So if that's okay, can we do that?
Absolutely. It would be my honor, sir.
Oh, fantastic. No, the honor would be all mine. So once again, my friends, this is Brian Saur. And just once again, to let everyone know, where can people find you, locate you? What's the best place for people to interact with you or listen to you?
Let's see. Well, so Just the Dis is on, I believe I think Pure Cinema and Just the Dis. If you look them up in iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you go. I think they're available in pretty much all podcast formats. I think we get them out to wherever you listen. So listen and subscribe if you like the shows. If you listen and you think they're good. I interact a lot on Twitter and Instagram. I am Bob Freelander on Twitter, but I also have accounts for Just the Disc Pod and Pure Cinema Pod. So I'm pretty active there. And then on Instagram, we have a Pure Cinema Pod. And I think I'm most active on my Just the Disc Pod Instagram. A lot of posting of Blu-rays, pictures. If you're into that, that's what I do. And I think that's the main one. I'm also Rupert Pupkin Speaks on Instagram. That's my personal Instagram. I don't use that quite as much as Just the Disc Pod these days. But if you're looking for announcements about episodes, I always put up new announcements for that stuff on both the Instagram and Twitter. So that would be my recommendation if you are interested and want to connect.
Great, wonderful. And I will have all the information in the description box of this YouTube video. So if anyone needs to find any specific links, everything will be there. So you can check that out at your own pace and leisure. So once again, Brian Saur, my dear, dear friend, Brian Saur, thank you so much for your time. And please take very good care of yourselves. My warmest regards to you and your family and the people at Pure Cinema and Just the Discs. Please extend to everyone my warmest regards, and we will talk very soon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.